All right, let's talk about something you've probably heard of, the mark of the beast. It's a phrase that brings up all these images of sci-fi dystopias and total government control. But what if the most popular idea about it isn't the whole story? Today, we're diving into a perspective that challenges that whole microchip narrative.
So, let's just get right to the heart of it. When people talk about the mark of the beast, what do they picture? Almost always, it's some kind of implant, right? A tiny chip that you have to get to buy, sell, or just live your life. But is that really what we should be thinking about? Let's break down another way of looking at this. First up, let's really dig into that common and honestly pretty scary idea, the mark as this ultimate tool of control. Yeah, this is the view you see in movies, right? It comes from reading the book of Revelation very literally. A system where you can't buy a coffee or pay your rent without a specific mark on your right hand or your forehead, all tied to showing loyalty to some big, scary global power. It's a terrifying thought. But the source we're looking at today asks a really important question. Is there maybe a deeper, more symbolic meaning going on here? And here is a twist that a lot of people miss. The Bible doesn't just talk about the mark of the beast, it actually presents its direct opposite, something called the seal of God. Think of them as two sides of the same coin. One is about divine protection, the other is about allegiance to an enemy power. And this interpretation argues you really can't understand one without the other. So it poses the question, if the seal of God is a spiritual thing, couldn't the mark of the beast be spiritual too? Okay, so let's run with that idea for a second. If the mark isn't a chip or a tattoo, what could it possibly be? Well, this interpretation starts by looking at what happens to the people who supposedly take it, the consequences. And this is where you see the stakes are just incredibly high. According to the text, taking this mark isn't just about getting a new way to pay for groceries. It's directly tied to worship, and it leads to facing divine judgment and, well, eternal punishment. The consequences are deeply, profoundly spiritual. And that brings us to the real head-scratcher for this interpretation. How can a physical object, a piece of silicon, a bit of ink, have that kind of catastrophic effect on a person's soul, on their entire eternal destiny? And here it is. This is the core logic from our source. The argument is simple, really. The soul, your inner spirit, just doesn't operate on that physical level. No external item, whether it's a high-tech chip or anything else, can fundamentally change who you are spiritually or condemn your soul. So something else has to be going on. So here's the big reveal from this perspective. The mark of the beast isn't an object you receive, it's a spirit you accept. The source describes it as a deceiving spirit. In Hindi, that's patka dene wali atma. It's a spirit that you willingly let in after you've already made a choice to reject what is true. So it's an internal thing, not an external one. Now let's flip the coin and look at the other side of the spiritual equation. If the mark is a deceiving spirit, what does that make its opposite, the seal of God? Exactly. Following that same train of thought, the seal of God isn't a physical stamp either. It's identified as the Holy Spirit, something received internally through faith and belief. It's like a spiritual sign of ownership, a marker that says this person belongs to God. So what's this seal for? Well, it basically does two big things. First, it identifies who God's people are. And second, it protects them from the very judgment that's supposed to fall on those who have the mark of the beast. You can almost think of it like a spiritual passport that gets you through a really dangerous time. Okay, so we've got two very different ideas facing off. The mark as a physical microchip on one side, and the mark as an internal, deceiving spirit on the other. Let's see how the spiritual interpretation handles the specific details from the text. So what about the whole forehead and right hand thing? I mean, that sounds pretty physical, right? Well, in this view, you have to think symbolically. The forehead isn't for a chip. It represents your mind, your thoughts, and who you choose to worship. And the right hand? That represents your actions, your work, and who you choose to serve. So getting the mark in these places means giving your total allegiance in both thought and action. This completely reframes the whole conversation. If the forehead is about what you believe and the hand is about what you do, then the huge world-ending choice described in the text isn't really about a piece of technology at all. It's about which spirit you willingly choose to guide your thoughts and your actions. It's a conscious decision of spiritual loyalty, one that's probably made long before any kind of tech is ever put on the table. This all leads to a pretty powerful conclusion. The final conflict described isn't really about technology versus humanity. It's about something much, much more fundamental. So, in the end, humanity gets sorted into two camps. On one side, you have those who accept the truth and receive the Holy Spirit that identifies them as belonging to God and leads to their protection. And on the other side, you have those who reject the truth and instead accept a deceiving spirit that identifies them as followers of the beast. And, well, that leads to judgment. So, the big takeaway from this entire perspective is this: the ultimate test isn't about resisting a chip, it's about your core spiritual loyalty. It's a choice of belief that ends up determining your destiny. And it leaves us with this final thought, that maybe the final battle isn't for control of your body through some piece of tech, but for the allegiance of your belief. It's a pretty provocative idea that shifts the whole focus from a chip in your skin to a conviction in your soul.